We are recording the interview of James F. Pigg. This interview is being conducted by Keturah Edwards from Wright State University Veterans Voices Project. This interview is being recorded at Wright State University in Liberal Arts Building at 1:29 p.m. on September 7, 2017. First question is, where and when were you born?
Okay, I was born in June of 1947 in Centralia, Illinois, in the United States of America.
Okay, and who were your parents and what were their occupations?
Okay, my dad was William Pigg, and he was a printer by trade. He served in World War II as a ball turret gunner in B-24s, flying out of Italy. So we've got the Air Force in common there. He was with the 449th Bomb Group, the 716th Bomb Squadron. He got recalled to active duty when Korea went up, sold the family business, and then stayed in the Air Force for 20 years, retiring as a senior master sergeant. My mom is Mildred B. Pigg, and her maiden name was Moody. She was a legal secretary. So I later on went to law school, so I've got flying and law on both sides of my family. When we got recalled to active duty, then my mom quit her job as a legal secretary and just accompanied us, did volunteer work for the Red Cross at every base we were ever stationed at. Yeah.
Do you have any siblings?
No.
Okay. So how does that feel? How young were you when your father was recalled?
I had not started school yet. And so we actually started at Scott Air Force Base when he got recalled. And he's like many, many other World War II vets. He probably talked to me about World War II for a total of 5 minutes during his life. You know, no stories from him or World War II at all. But so my life until I was pretty much 21 was as a military dependent. And it was good. I traveled all over the world, all different states, went to different schools, got a decent education, and then went on to college. I was the first one to go to college in my family.
And what were you doing before you entered the service?
Going to college. Vietnam was heating up, and the draft was getting ready. It was in process, but it was getting ready to change over to from just the draft into deferment system, where you were a student, you got deferred. It was changing over to a lottery system in numbers. But at the time I was in, I just went down and did a delayed enlistment. And in December of '68, I enlisted in the Air Force because my dad was Air Force. And I didn't want to be in the Marines or the Army in Vietnam. So I wanted to be in the Air Force. So that's how I ended up going into the Air Force as a delayed enlistee. Since I was in college at the time, I had the opportunity to get a commission through officer training school. And so when I delayed enlisted, it was to get an assignment to officer training school. I passed the aptitude test to be a pilot. So I was going to be headed for pilot training when I completed OTS, officer training.
How was boot camp like, or officer training?
It was officer training school, and it was at Lackland Air Force Base. And I've been a dependent for 21 years. I had 2 years of Army ROTC at St. Mary's University in San Antonio. I'd applied for West Point and had hoped to get accepted and didn't. And it was really quite easy. I'd marched in the Army ROTC and all of that. So, I mean, not a big shakes for me. Lived in a barracks with a bunch of officer trainees. A lot of them were civilians, and some officer trainees were prior enlisted who had a chance to get commissioned because they'd been getting a degree under the AETC, under an Air Force program where they got sent to college. And once they got commissioned, then they had an opportunity. Once they got their college degree, they had an opportunity to get a commission. So that was that. So it was good. Drill and ceremonies, customs and courtesies, that type of thing.
Do you recall any of your instructors?
Because it was officer training, we just had the one, a guy named Captain Silverthorne, and that's what I called him. I have no idea what his first name is or anything, but it's Captain Silverthorne. He did a really nice job. He was a very level-headed guy. Took a bunch of college kids and taught them about the Air Force and how it started up in the Army Air Corps in LeMay, and got you ready to go be a commissioned officer and not be too big a jerk when you started dealing with enlisted folks.
Did you receive any specialized training?
After officer training, because I was a pilot trainee on my enlistment, I went to Randolph Air Force Base in Texas to start undergraduate pilot training, UPT, is the acronym. And so I drove all the way from Lackland at the south end of San Antonio to the north end of San Antonio to Randolph Air Force Base. And got second lieutenant, got bachelor's quarters, assigned, shared with another officer trainee, and shared a kitchen, and started the 53-week undergraduate pilot training course. It's a year-long, very intense course. I want to mention that at my officer trainee graduation, we had a little parade, and then my dad showed up in his uniform as a senior master and got my first salute and $1 from me, which is a nice way to start a career as an officer.
So how was that training like? Were you allowed to, was it simulation?
No, the simulators were very ancient compared to today's full movement things. Mm-hmm. They're mostly procedural type things. There's no motion in any of the simulators. Instruments and all would reflect, but you were firmly anchored to the ground. But Vietnam was really cranking up, and so they had a lot of pilots going through time after time after time. I was in class 7008, which was the 8th class in the fiscal year of 1970. And if you failed a ride, then your next ride was a check ride, and if you didn't pass it, you were eliminated. That was it. There was no redo, no overs. One strike, kapow, because there are so many people and so little time, you had to make it in the 53 weeks. Bam, a really straight pipeline. You started out in the T-41, which is a little Cessna 172, a little prop job with high wing, and about 30 hours in that, and you learned how to get an airplane off the ground safely and return and land safely. And then, after only those 30 hours, you went right into jets. Little twin-engine jet. You sit side by side with the instructor pilot, and you do instruments, what we call VFR, visual flight rules. Use the outside of the canopy to learn to fly. You learn aerobics, upside down, backwards, crossways, all sorts of different Cuban 8s, which is a maneuver where you do a couple loops and stuff, barrel rolls or long rolls, all of those things. And then a little two-ship formation, and then you pass that, you go into the T-38, which they're still using today in advanced training. It's a supersonic tandem seat, front and back trainer, and same kind of course, except you added quite a bit of four-ship formation, because after you got through the T-38, which I think was about 120 hours, you got your wings. So you were ready to train to fly any aircraft in the Air Force inventory if you could fly that T-38. And I would say, based on that 53 weeks of training, you were ready to fly anything that had wings and do it pretty deadgum good, too. I cannot say enough about the Air Force training. I haven't flown regularly in a number of years, and yet I've flown simulators a couple times over the last 15 years, and I've taken the simulators off, flown them around, done acro, brought them back, landed them, and these are motion simulators, no problem. F-15, F-18, C-5, and a little T-6. I've flown those sims with different things I've participated in. So excellent training. You learn a lot in 53 weeks. Or you became a clerk or something, because if you didn't make it in 53 weeks, you didn't become a pilot back then.
So, like, for the people who didn't pass, they just send them somewhere else?
You were indeed commissioned, and so you had to get assigned to another career field that people were short in. It wasn't uncommon, because most of us had signed up to be pilots to fly, to change over to become a navigator.
Okay.
I'd say 2 of the people in my class became navs. And then one of them washed out pilot training, became a nav, and after a couple of years as a nav, went back through pilot training and graduated.
Okay.
And ended up becoming a pilot.
That's good to hear.
Well, be persistent. Don't give up.
How did you adapt to military life, including the physical regimen, barracks, food, and social life?
Yeah. Nothing new. I mean, it was the work side of what I'd done as a military dependent for all that time. I went from undergraduate pilot training, get my wings, then I had to have an airframe. I had to have a weapon system to fly, and so I got assigned to B-52s. During Vietnam, in that part of Vietnam, that was 70, the airframes were limited. Of the 50 people that graduated my pilot training class, there was like 2 fighter aircraft. And then half the aircraft were B-52s for SAC, and the other half were KC-135s, and then there was some transports and stuff. So SAC really got a large part of my class, because it's the demands of the service, right? Mm-hmm. What the service needs. Half of, they needed B-52 and 135 pilots. So I chose B-52s, because I wasn't at the top of my class to get one of those 2 fighters, because I wanted to operate a weapon system. If I was going to fly and fight for my country, I actually wanted to drop bombs, do the combat mission. Mm-hmm. And also, the B-52 had a really nice ejection seat and parachute, and the KC-135 didn't. Plus, would you really want to tell somebody that if you were a tanker pilot, say, what do you do for a living? Say, you can't really say, I fly jets. You say, I pass gas. Mm-hmm. That just doesn't sound nearly as much fun, as I fly B-52s.
Okay, where did you serve, or who was your first?
Okay, well, because I got B-52s, mm-hmm. I went up to Loring in Maine. Many of the Strategic Air Command bases were in the northern tier, because it was common to fly, to have missions flight, to fly across the ice cap and to bomb the Soviet Union. I mean, that was the war we were preparing for, was a nuclear war with the Soviets, and that's what the Buffs were doing. We couldn't say that, but everybody knew that. So I went to Loring, got married on the way to my wife, who's also an Air Force brat, so her adjustments weren't that bad either. Both of our dads had been NCOs. And then from Loring, went back and went to nuclear weapons school on the way at Carswell Air Force Base in Dallas-Fort Worth, and went to survival training at Fairchild Air Force Base in Spokane, Washington. And after the nuke course was a week, the survival course was 2 weeks, living in the field and also going through a simulated POW camp, using things that some of the POWs, well, one POW that had escaped from Vietnam had taught them, and things that they'd learned through intelligence about what it was like in those camps to try and help us if, God forbid, we ever did it. So we did that. Then down to Castle Air Force Base in Merced, California, learned to fly the Buff. And here it comes. The buff is the big, ugly, fat fucker. Okay? It's not a big, ugly, fat fellow or a feller, right? It's the big, ugly, it's the buff. That's the way it was. That's the term we used. It was combat. At that time, it was all male community too. So, that was the acronym. So you would use the term buff for B-52s. And it's trying to transition because if you can think of a T-38, which is like if you see the aerobatic airplanes for like the Thunderbirds or the F-16 or the F-18 that the Navy flies, it's like very slim, and the wingspan is maybe, I don't know, a little bit bigger than this table we're at. The inboard flap segment of a B-52 is bigger than that. So you went from flying something really hot and fast to flying something that weighed 488,000 pounds at takeoff. So that's a big transition. It was really slow. When you flew that thing and you made adjustments in the air, it had a little yoke, and you would put some adjustment in. The airlines and forms would come up, and it would slowly move. And what you did was, the way you flew it, especially like refueling and things, you put a little adjustment in and waited, and the airplane responded, and you looked, and then you waited again. So it wasn't something you did very sharp and snappily. It was something you did very smoothly. Yeah. So it was quite something learning to fly that big an airplane, because it was a 6-man crew. There's an aircraft commander in the left seat, who was the senior pilot. Co-pilot in the right seat, who's usually a lieutenant or a captain. There's a radar nav downstairs. It was like a captain major. There's a navigator. The radar nav dropped the bombs and set the targets, and the navigator got you to on course and did celestial navigation, things like that. He was the first lieutenant or captain. And then we had upstairs an EW, who was an electronic warfare officer who jammed SAM signals and fighters and things like that. And then in the first airplane we flew, the F model, B-52F, which is an older, the gunner sat all the way in the back by himself. He was enlisted. They were anywhere from airman first up to staff sergeant. And he had his own little cockpit back there, 4 50 caliber machine guns. And he sat in the back airplane, had a little pressurized compartment, and then everything between the very tail and the very front of the airplane was unpressurized and was fuel and bombs. So getting 6 people to work in concert like any team is another challenge too, because you have to know your own job and you have to time it so that your jobs fit smoothly together, just like the cogs in gear. Yeah. So it was really challenging, but it wasn't overwhelming, or it wasn't anything you ever had a doubt you could do. You had that confidence you could do it. And a word on behalf of pilots. People will see a pilot and they'll think arrogant. That's in part true, and it's a little necessary. To have that capability to fly anything, but a particularly big airplane like that, you've got to have the self-confidence and the image or aura that people know you have that ability and confidence. So they rely on you that you can bring that airplane out of anything and do anything with it. We don't say that I climb into the airplane. We say, I strap that airplane on. The airplane's going where I want to go. I strap the airplane onto me. So to fly and do a good job, you really have to have that kind of self-confidence. And so it can be a little overwhelming or off-putting to some people sometimes, until the first thing goes wrong and you get shot at or something falls off, and then they're really damn glad you've got that capability.
Did you have to experience that, getting shot at?
I did, and we just talked about B-52s and training, and now let's talk about flying a B-52 in combat. We trained for nuclear war in the States, but as the Vietnam War escalated, more and more B-52s went to Vietnam to drop bombs because you could carry up to 108 bombs at a time in a B-52D model. So the B-52D model was the one with the big shark fin tail and the black belly and camouflage. And the belly would hold 84 500-pounders, and you could put 24 in the wings, so you get 108 bombs on that thing. It really made it worthwhile for a target. It didn't make the target happy, but it made it worth your time, you know. So we got relieved from the nuclear mission and sent TDY for 179 days. If they sent you for 180 days, it counted as a Southeast Asia tour, which was a very important thing for someone to get during that time frame, because you wanted, for promotion purposes, for jobs, for progression, you wanted to have said, I fought in Vietnam, I did a year there. And so what they would do is if you served a 180-day tour, it counted as a long tour. So they'd cut all the orders for SAC for 179 days. Okay, it didn't matter if they extended you, that was for 179-day orders. So you never in SAC got a C tour. You did earn the awards. I'll give them that. You earned the awards for doing the job. You earned the awards for fighting in Vietnam for the campaigns, but you didn't get that Southeast Asia on your record that so many others wanted. Yeah. So anyway, so we shipped out almost, well, every time I went over, I went twice, so it's 4 trips. We always flew on SAC 135, so ran logistics back and forth. And this first time, my crew came off Nuclear Alert, flew commercial to Castle Air Force Base again, and went through replacement training unit. We'd flown G models, the nuclear capable things in Loring, B-52Gs. The D models were while we're dropping bombs in Vietnam. So we went from Loring commercial to back to Castle Air Force Base and flew 3 missions, learning how to drop bombs in Vietnam and learning the different systems on the B-52D because it was an older model. So we had to kind of reacquaint ourselves with that. And we flew with 2 other crews. All the missions in Vietnam for the B-52 were flown in 3 ship cells. 3 B-52s acting as a unit, and I'll talk about that a little. So we went to Castle, learned the D model, learned how to fly the combat missions, and then we got on a tanker and went to Utapao, Thailand, where we spent a little over 6 months. And at Utapao, you would fly about 3.5, 4.5 hours because Vietnam was just right there. So you'd take off, fly, drop your bombs, come back and land in around 4 hours. You'd fly 9 days in a row. You'd fly 3 ship, 3 days, and as you rotated, there was about 6 other crews with you, and as you rotated through on these, the crews would rotate, and so you would fly with different air crews in these 3 ship cells on different days. But you do 3 daylight missions, 3 evening missions, and then you do 3 middle of the night missions, and then you have 3 days off. So we rotated 9 days, 3 off, 9. And so that's what we did out of that. Most of those missions were uneventful. The B-52s and the fighter pilots didn't respect us. The B-52s stayed in South Vietnam. There were no SAMs or AAAs in South Vietnam. There were all sorts of logistics and troops that we could bomb, but there was never really a threat against us. We weren't getting shot at. So those missions were pretty calm. There was some, if we have time, there were some things that went on. The airplane that made it interesting to do. I'll give you one from that in case we don't get back to it. So one of the missions, 108 bombs. You expect them all to drop. They cycle through, and you fill this square that's about a mile wide and 2 miles long. And the first airplane, B-52, puts his bombs down the center of the box. Number 2 airplane is a mile behind him and just a little off to the right, puts his bombs down the right side of the box. And then the 3rd airplane is 2 miles from lead, a mile behind too, and he flies on the left side of the box and puts his bombs down the left side. So you've got this 1 mile by 2 mile box with 3 bomb trains down the middle of it, and the concussion and the shock waves from those kind of overlap. So you can see some films of these things just ticking off all the way down through the jungle. And so that's the way we flew those missions. Well, on one of those missions, we got finished, came back off the target, and the radar navigator, the bombardier, goes, "Hey, pilot, we've got a light on the external rack. Is there anything out there?" It was a night mission. It's like, right external rack. I'm the co-pilot. And I stretch up and look out there and I go, "Yeah, there's still something hanging out there." He goes, "Yeah, I was afraid of that. The light is still on for that station." "Really?" I said, "Well, let me look a little closer." And I got up to the windscreen and looked. I said, "It looks like it's just hanging by one shackle, because there was a rack that attached to the bomb in 2 places, and then it was on the wing, and it kind of looked like the nose was up and the rest was kind of flailing around." Mm-hmm. When it falls off the rack, arming wires come out of the nose and the tail and arm fuses. Well, this one was still on there, so the nose is probably okay, but the tail, you don't know where that arming rack is, so the fuse could be armed on the tail. So we declared an emergency, came back around, set everything up, really long, slow final, and co-pilot manages the fuel, keeps an eye on that, says, "Okay, pilot." The pilot sat down. This is the most perfect landing that pilot made out of the 52 landings that we made over there. You could barely tell you're on the runway. Pull the drag chute out to help slow us, tap on the brakes very gently, stop it right on the middle of the runway, grab your bags, go out the nose, run like hell straight out the nose, and then go. Some of these guys that are here at the Unipower reunion are munitions maintenance guys. Okay, that's their bomb. We didn't drop it. Back to you. We took off. It was up to them to figure out what was going to go on with it. So I couldn't tell you whether it was armed or not. All I could tell you was we took off. So that's one of the things. But so we flew 52 missions on that out of Utapao, and then. How are we doing for time?
We're doing really good. You
okay?
continue. You said it was 3. That was the first story.
Yeah.
You can go continue to
Okay.
too.
Well, the other one was we took off. There's 18,000 pound. They call them drop tanks, but tip tanks on the B-52, way on the outside. They're as big as a small airplane, and so. We took off, we got set up, and then the co-pilot would adjust this big panel and you'd set everything up. So the fuel flowed so that you were always had a center of gravity so you wouldn't get nose or tail and stall. So you had to be very careful. You had about 270,000 pounds of fuel. So you had to be very careful about where you put the fuel so you didn't throw the airplane out of bounds. Well, these tip tanks were aft of the center of gravity because the B-52 wings sweep back, and so they're way back there. Something went wrong with the valve system, and they wouldn't feed. So we had 30-some-odd thousand pounds of gas, avgas, JP4, stuck in the back of the airplane. So eventually, we were going to have a huge CG problem. Well, part of the bomb bay is forward of that. So we called the command post, the people at this Utapao, and said, "Hey, we can't get these tips to feed." And we pulled circuit breakers and we changed knobs and things, and they still wouldn't feed. So they said, "Keep your bombs, bring it back." And so as the co-pilot, I took this little slipstick little slide rule and figured out how much we had aft, and then put some gas in the forward body tank up at the nose, back up by where the pilot sat in the front to balance the CG out. And we kept the bombs, which added some 4CG, brought it all around, another real long, slow approach, landed on the runway, didn't shoot, popped it. This time, none of the bombs were potentially armed or anything, so we sent the nav in the back. He went through this little hatch from the pressurized compartment in the bomb bay, looked, made sure there wasn't anything laying on the bomb bay doors, that nothing had come loose or anything, and said, yeah, it's clear. And once again, we took our bags, went out the nose, and left it for maintenance. Like, look, guys, you don't even have to load this one here. You know, they're all here. And I'm sure they repaired the tip tanks, but they wouldn't feed. But it created a huge in-flight emergency because it could have killed us if we had not all done our job right. We needed to keep the aircraft in CG. And the last thing was on one of those missions out at Utapao, we flew with cluster bombs, which are called blueies.
What are the cluster bombs?
It's a 2,000-pound bomb loaded up with bomblets inside of it, which are about baseball or softball size, that have little ridges on them, or like winglets, like a little. And so at a set altitude, after you release the 2,000-pounder, it's a canister, it blows apart, and all these tiny little anti-personnel bombs spread out and spin and arm. And some of them go off on impact, some of them lie and go off on a time, and others go off when you jar it, when there's a vibration on the ground. And so we flew one of those missions with the 2,000-pounders on, and it's war is kind of an interesting contradiction, because it was one of the prettiest sights I've seen at night, because as these things fell, they would spread out randomly, and there would be this little twinkling, sparkling effect on the ground as the bombs exploded. And so it was interesting from the air, but as we came off of that turn, because we dropped the blueies, which were anti-personnel, so they knew there was a large concentration of personnel in the area we dropped those. As we came out, we saw off our nose a C-47 called Puff, the Magic Dragon, which was armed with Gatling guns on its side. And Puff would establish a bank and just circle around a target with the Gatling guns on this circular target of concentration, either trucks or personnel, and just obliterate it. I mean, around every few inches. And so we watched him work, and it looked like, because of the tracer rounds in there, it looked like this stream of fire going down towards the ground. But because it's like when a wheel looks like it's turning backwards, because of the way the stream of fire was, it looked like the fire was coming up and was kind of pushing Puff around. It looked like the reverse than what it was. It looked like here's this arc of fire doing that. And then another aircraft would come over, drop a flare that turned night into day. You could actually see the green in the jungle. And then Puff would kind of adjust his target track. So that was very interesting, kind of a one-of-a-kind mission that we flew. You seldom did that. Very impressive, and I'm sure it was very, very harsh on the ground. But that's what we were there for, was to win it. So anyway, so that was kind of it for Utapao. Then we came back to the States, flew in 135s, got to Loring, stayed there 5 months. I had started to upgrade to aircraft commander, which was a logical progression, and we got sent overseas again. The aircraft commander got promoted. Well, I got promoted to major. Went to work in the command post. We got a new aircraft commander, and we didn't have to retrain, because we were going to go fly B-52Gs and drop iron bombs out of the more modern airplanes. The war had heated up some more just before we left Utapao, talking about that 179 days, we got extended. We were sitting outside, fat, dumb, and happy, literally, eating watermelon at a picnic table in the crew area of Utapao, and some dude walks by and says, "Hey, you guys know you've been extended?" I'm like, bullshit. What do you mean we've been? No, you're kidding. No, I mean, we're eating watermelon. We're going home the next day. No, you're extended. Sure enough, the pilot says, "Let me just check." I went and called the command post, like, "Yeah, we're extended. We're going to Guam." So we'd flown D models, but because we were G crews in the States, we knew how to fly those, and we knew the combat mission. So they sent us to Guam, and we opened up what they call Operation Bullet Shot, where they sent a large group of B-52Gs, the more modern airplanes, to Andersen Air Force Base in Guam to drop bombs during the Vietnam War, towards the end of the air war in Vietnam. So we stayed an extra month training people to do that, went back to Loring. So when we came back from Loring the next time, heck, we'd trained those guys. Heck, it was the airplane we knew best. So, we went right back over, got assigned billets. The place, Andersen Air Force Base, was packed with Air Force personnel. It was over capacity. The maintenance crews were living in 10 buildings, 10 metal buildings that were probably from World War II. No air conditioning. They would open like the sides up to try and get a cross breeze. The ones that came a little later than them lived in what we called Tent City. Old World War II green OD canvas tents. No air conditioning. They did put floors in them, and even the showers and latrines they ran the plumbing into the tents. So we were crew members, and we had to get crew rest. There were certain actually physical things we had to oblige and do so that we could fly the airplane, because they're going to give you at that time a $7 million airplane, and so we got the better quarters. We were across the street in an old BOQ, and there was 6-man crew. There was 6 of us in what had been in a queue that had been built for 2 people. There was a room on one end, a room on the other end, and there was a latrine and a shower in between. And there was 3 beds in one side and 3 beds in the other, and all 6 of us lived together. And all that stuff about the enlisted guy has to be in his own barracks and all that, Well, when it came time for the Air Force to figure out what to do with their crews, by golly, that rule didn't apply so much. And, just like on the airplane, all 6 of us were equal. We all had jobs to do. So the gunner lived with us, in the queue. And we flew the G model, which meant the gunner rode up front with us. He didn't ride in the back anymore. He had 50 caliber guns in the back, but they were remote control. And he had radar that looked back there. So we were over there for the really big push of the war, which many sources and several POW returnees will say brought North Vietnam back to the negotiating table and ended the Vietnam conflict. We were there for that push. It's called the 11-Day War. It was called the Christmas bombings. It went from 18 December through 29 December, 11-Day War, 1972. And let me get this straight. I actually wrote this down. During the 11-Day War, B-52s flew 729 sorties, dropped 15,000 tons of bombs, and were shot at by 1,240 SAMs. 15 B-52s were shot at. They lost to combat. So, first time we'd lost anyone to combat. The airplanes had been damaged before, but they'd recovered. So this war was started, this 11-day war, this Christmas bombing, was started. It's called Linebacker 2 is the official name. Linebacker, Roman numeral 2. Because President Nixon was really annoyed with the North Vietnamese. Kissinger had come back and said, peace is at hand. And when the North Vietnamese heard him say that, and they knew that the anti-war sympathy, that the Congress and everyone was against him, they just pulled back from the table and started changing the rules. No, we want this. No, we want that. That's not what we agreed to. And walked out of the negotiations for the peace. And Nixon was in a period of time where Congress was on a break. So he had a few weeks where he could pretty much do what he wanted with the military. And by golly, he said, I want an all-out 3-day push. We're going to bomb North Vietnam. I want the B-52 to go in. Chief of the Air Force, I don't want to hear any more excuses or whining about how you can't do this and you can't do that. You've got carte blanche. And I have to say, the crews are thrilled. We're scared, but we were thrilled. We were going to get to do our mission. We're going to get to do the things we could do. We're going to get to do what we thought we could do all along, which was actually win. We didn't, but we thought so. So anyway, so we flew 4 times during those 11 days. 3 of the missions were into North Vietnam in what they call Route Pack 6, which is where the fighter guys had all gone and had kind of belittled us because we wouldn't go, but really the Air Force would not let us even attempt that because it was so heavily defended by SAMs. So the fighter guys finally saw, hey, we're going to do our part. The B-52s are going to go up there. And then they kind of went, these guys are crazy. I wouldn't go up there and get shot at by SAMs in something that's that big a target. And so we reached a little mutual respect there as part of that. So anyway, we flew the 20th, which was the 3rd day, the 27th and the 29th, the last 2 days. On the 23rd, we flew a mission, but we lost so many B-52s. They sent us to the South Vietnam where there were no SAMs that day. So it was part of Linebacker, but we weren't in the Hanoi Route Pack 6 area. So the day I'd like to talk about is the 20th. It was the 3rd day of the 11-day war, 20 December 72. We flew a mission in B-52G. It ended up being 14 and a half hours as we were fueling on the way over, very close to the Philippines. Tankers came out of the Philippines to refuel us. We were going to the, what's the name of that place? It's a power plant. Here it is, Tai Nguyen Thermal Power Plant, north of Hanoi, was our target, the 20th. 3 B-52s had been shot down the first day of that 11-day war. And so we knew we weren't invulnerable, and we knew that there's a high chance of getting shot down. So on the 3rd day when we went in, we were pretty scared. And you know something's not in here, but before we flew that mission, which everybody was so tense about and everything, Bob Hope came into the briefing room with the chaplain, told us how much he respected us, was with the chaplain, and the chaplain said a prayer, got a round of applause and left. But that man was a saint. He was there. I saw him twice. I saw him at Christmas of 71 and Christmas of 72. And I'm sure guys saw him more than that, but he really felt it for the troops. He was a really good guy. So anyway, so we did the briefing. We took off 14 and a half hours, refueling. On the way into Vietnam, we came from the west over the Gulf of Tonkin, and on the way into Vietnam, there were already airplanes leaving because we had 3 waves of B-52s. There's like 100 B-52s launched that day 3. And as we were going on the way in, I'm still a co-pilot, but we're sitting there looking at the buffs leaving, and they fly 3 ship cells. there's only 2 airplanes in that flight. Where's the 3rd airplane? So we started to get tense. We got over the land in Vietnam. We tightened up our formation to only a half-mile spacing between B-52s to make better electronic warfare coverage and to rely on one another so that somebody had some antennas pointing at the SAMs all the time. So we closed up the spacing. So as a co-pilot, I would fly the throttles. The pilot would fly the position. And we would just tail along. We were number 2, we'd tail along behind lead. And if we got right to a half mile, my eyes were better then, you could see the little blue flames or little blue dots on each of the 8 engines on the buff in front of you. That was a half mile when you could first see those blue things. So I flew it visual the whole way, right on those blue things. Pilot flew it visual, he could see that too. And that's the way we kept our half mile spacing on the way. As we come into the country, we hear an emergency call, Mayday, 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 and a call sign, I don't remember, but Mayday, 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 and on guard. And the guard frequency is 245.0 UHF, and so everybody in the area can hear if you have an emergency, dire emergency, it's Mayday. And it was clearly, it was some kind of fighter. It wasn't one of our call signs. And the Navy did lose an A6 that day. So I suspect we heard him in his Mayday call as we were still coming in. Then as we got closer and closer to the power plant, we picked up more calls about SAMs. And they would call SAM this heading off of Bullseye. Bullseye was Hanoi, because that was our bullseye. So that didn't help you much, because in your airplane, that didn't tell you anything about the relationship to you or the altitude or the number of SAMs or anything. Then we got a little closer, we could see the launches. And so there was there's low, not very low, but a low cloud cover. We were 30-something thousand feet. And it was obscured, but we bombed by radar, so that didn't matter, So you would find some kind of offsetting point, a big building or a huge hill or something, and the radar would use that to put his crosshairs on, and this computer would figure out where you released the bombs. So we did radar bombing, so the clouds didn't bother us. But when a SAM was launched, because of this, there was this little glow underneath the clouds. It's like a flash of a flashlight. It's like the old pinball machines that used to have little white bouncers in the center of them that would light up white. It would flash. So it would flash, and then in just a few seconds after that, a small bluish, whitish flame would come through the clouds. And in relation to your aircraft, it would seek. It was like a snake's head. It would search. And it would come up and it would jiggle a little and adjust, and jiggle a little and adjust. And if it was being guided, the EW would pick up the signal and call uplink. That was bad. Uplink meant it's being sent to you electronically. Mm-hmm. So as we're on the way in, co-pilot on the right side, SAM 3 o'clock. Roger. Let me know, because we'd seen over 25 SAMs already. We'd quit calling them out because there was just too many to even call. 1,240 over the course of 11 days. So anyway, SAM 3 o'clock. Roger, watch it. Then the EW goes, uplink. Not good. And I'm looking, I'm going, SAM's holding position. So you're moving, a SAM is moving. If it stays in the same place in your windscreen, that means it's tracking you. By maintaining its position, that means it's going to be on a collision course with you. I said, same place in the windscreen, pilot. Evade. The pilot rolls it over towards the SAM. The buff was permitted only to do 45 degrees of bank because it was so big, 180 plus feet. Roger. So he rolls it over. One way to lose altitude in an airplane is the lift on the is perpendicular to the wing surface. So if you turn the airplane into 90 degrees of bank, it's got no uplift, and it falls pretty quick. He kept turning, I kept calling, still there. So he reached almost 90 degrees of bank in a B-52. But I pulled the throttles back because we knew we were going to dive. The nose fell through the horizon, and we slowly went down. Now he didn't keep it there. As it come down, you have to be safe. It's a big airplane. He pulls it out. So after about 1,000 feet of lost altitude, he pulls it out. It's gone, and it went off. It went above us. I didn't see it explode or anything. We didn't see that, but I'm convinced by losing that altitude, turning into that Sam missed us. We rolled out. He pulls it back up because lead number 1 is still there. I push the throttles, 8 throttles all the way up. We pop back up, fall back in, right behind lead.
Wow.
Okay. We continue on in. A little more excited now. And from the initial point, the IP to the target, straight and level. Did not get shot at during that time. Thank you. Dropped our bombs and then did a big break off the target and came around at 45 degrees, the permitted angle. Rolled out and then rolled out right behind lead again. And that way, while lead's in his turn, our antennas are down, our ECM is up. When he rolls out, we're in our turn, his antennas are down. So it worked pretty well. We roll out and the gunner goes, "Bogey, I've got an airplane behind me." "Where?" 3 or 4 miles. Like, what? Well, check it. And so gunner goes on guard. Aircraft behind whatever our cell was, Coral Cell, or all the cells, 3 ships where they had color names. He says, "Identify yourself." Says, "Rogers 3. So number 3 had fallen way out of position coming off that turn. He was 3 miles out of position behind us. And then he caught up and we came back, climbed up to 41,000, 41.5, 42. And then as soon as you got out of the country, you were over the Gulf again, feet wet, 3 chicks. So that meant you were out and all 3 of you had made it to cell. You were intact. So that was that mission. But it was pretty hairy. On that mission, that day, 6 aircrafts got shot down. I think it was 4 Gs and 2 Ds. The G model aircraft, because it was from the States and had been planning and outfitted to fight the Soviet Union, didn't have as an effective electronic countermeasures against SAM-2s, which were older model SAMs that the Soviets had given to the North Vietnamese. So the G model had a much higher propensity of getting shot down. And they lost 4 that night and 2. And we weren't one of them. On the way in, after the fighter call almost left out, we looked off to our right to the east and saw a huge explosion in the air. Bright orange, just giant initial explosion, and then 2 smaller lights, burning lights, flames, falling. One pretty large and falling in a pretty straight trajectory, and another very flat and flipping as it went around in kind of a out of balance thing, as if it was the wing of an airplane on fire. And so we had this thing, and so the pilot and I go, "Oh shit." When you're in a crew airplane like that, and 2 of you can see out and 4 of you can't, when you say, "Oh shit," it gets everybody's attention. And so radar and nav go, "Pilot, what's going on? What's happening?" I said, we just saw a buff get blown up, we're sure. I mean, it was so huge, it's just all it could have been. There were no other airplanes that big or at that altitude. And I've done some research and looked. I think it was Orange 3, which would have been the 3rd airplane in a 3-ship cell And once again, if that third airplane gets out of position or it's a G model, he's vulnerable to get shot by a SAM. But because of the description of the way it happened, I'm pretty confident that was Orange 3 that got shot down on day 3. The other saying that goes along with calling out "oh shit" over the intercom is that one "oh shit" wipes out all your attaboys. So if you get attaboys, if you do something good, oh boy, that's great, you know. But as soon as you mess something up and you get one "oh shit," all your attaboys are used up. You've done it. So that was another little saying we had. And then one of the parts I really wanted to tell then is coming back from that mission where we'd seen the airplanes get shot down, or we'd been shot at, and we think targeted. We lived in that queue, 6 of us, as we're coming back in and the sun is coming up on Guam, a beautiful Pacific island. Beautiful day. Beautiful sunrise. We're just so thankful to be alive. We're walking down the second floor and the doors all opened out like some of the old motels. And before we get to our room, there are 2 doorways open on our landing, on our second floor. And there are several people in 1505 uniforms, which is just a starched khaki uniform, but it's not a flight suit and it's not a fatigues. And those people in 1505s were in that room filling cardboard boxes with personal belongings from crew that flew that night that wasn't as fortunate as we. And that morning, that feeling of elation, the sunrise, and then the somber aspects of seeing that has stuck with me for my life. It's an aha moment, it's an epiphany, it's a like, wow, that could have been us. Mm-hmm. That could have been us. So when people tried to tell me, this is an emergency, and it's got to be done right now, or, oh, it has to be done in the next 10 minutes or something, you know, my response since that night has pretty much been, is somebody going to die? If they're not, it's not an emergency. It may be a problem, it may have some time limits, but, you know, to me, not an emergency. So that moment really, really stuck with me, and it served me well. You know, it's one of those things you bring home with you. Yeah. So we did okay. Then a couple nights later, the 23rd, we went down south and probably bombed the Chuck rubber plantation down in Cambodia, something like that. Then the 27th, we flew again. Strategic Air Command, the crews, the newspapers had been really distressed to see this many B-52s shut down. It never happened. It's a limited number of airframes. Losses hadn't been this high since World War II. And for 3 days in a row, that third day where the losses were so high that we flew from SAC headquarters in Omaha, Nebraska, not from Vietnam, not from Thailand, not from Ghana, from SAC headquarters in Omaha, Nebraska, the old-fashioned way by telex, not even instant communication, I think. We flew missions that were planned by Strategic Air Command planners. We flew the same route, the same altitude, the same coordinates, the same post-target turn 3 days in a row. It's really not a big surprise that those SAM operators knew exactly where we were going to be and were able to be so successful. So finally, on the 26th, after a one-day Christmas halt, SAC changed the tactics. And then when we flew on the 27th, it was the same. It was the changed tactics. And so the B-52s came in from 3 different directions. They flew different altitudes. They flew different headings. They struck the targets from a different approach angle. you could maneuver up until 60 seconds before you dropped your bombs instead of being on. And they were hugely successful. Those guys firing the SAMs didn't know what to do. They had 100 B-52s, 80, 100, in the air, and they all dropped their bombs within 15 minutes of one another. And it was hugely successful. Had we been flying those tactics, the losses would have assuredly been smaller. So when we flew that day, we were just thrilled to see they changed the tactics. We got some SAMs fired, none that tracked us like that one. Nobody got shot down. It was interesting, rather than go to the power plant, we went up to the north to hit a rail yard, Lang Son Railroad yard, and it was just inside the Chinese border. And what was happening was China was resupplying SAMs to the North Vietnamese, and they're coming through this railroad marshalling yard. So they sent the buffs up there to get the marshalling yard. And we did. But on the way in, because it was so close to China, China has a little island in the Gulf of Tonkin called Hainan Island. You could see it. It was lit up like a Christmas tree. It's all bright and everything. It's in the middle of this really dark ocean. And then as you look to the east and the north of that, mainland China, attached to the continent, there's this little row of little white Christmas lights in this jiggly-jangly thing all along the Chinese border. And so it looked like this old kid's light bright set where you got a black piece of paper and you poke a little plastic clear thing in there and it draws a little line of dotted lights. Well, you could exactly see the Chinese border. You could map it out because the lights inside China were on. The lights in North Vietnam were off. And it was just amazing to see. So, I mean, gosh, it was easy to stay out of China. I mean, it wasn't a problem at all, aside from the navigation. But we flew up to the railroad yards, dropped our bombs, turned around, and then came straight down to the Gulf and got feet wet right away because our Navy owned the Gulf. So if you got feet wet, if you got shot down or punched out or something, there was a really high probability the Navy, either a ship or a helicopter, is going to pick you up. So that made all sorts of sense too, because on the other days when people got shot down, they turned and tried to make it back to Thailand, and a couple of them didn't make it all the way back to Thailand. So those tactics were changed. That was really great. We flew the 29th, the last day. There was very, very few SAMs. We hit the railroad yards again. And finished them off. And so part of that was they'd shot them all, but the other part was the harbor was mined. We'd bombed their marshalling yards. They weren't bringing new ones in. So at the 29th, we had them on their knees. And in fact, prior to the 29th, they actually, through diplomatic channels, said we want to reopen peace negotiations. What a surprise! And within a month or a month and a half, the Paris Peace Accords were signed. You can see some interviews from POWs, and several of them have said, when we were in Hanoi and we heard the B-52s going downtown, we knew we were going home. So that's my combat. What happened? Let's see. We'll give you one more about that too, and
Okay.
There's a colonel, I think he's now General McCarthy, who did several of these briefings for the linebacker missions. And on the one we flew on the 20th, he briefed, and then he had a briefing with all the pilots in the cell and said, these are the tactics. You won't exceed 45 degrees of bank. You will brake only the way you're told to brake. You'll fly these altitudes. You won't maneuver here and there. And told us all these rules and says, everybody got it. I said, Roger, sir. And so Colonel went off to get with his airplane and his crew, and then the 6 pilots in our cell got together and had another briefing and said, we're going to fly whatever altitude we need. We're going to fly at this airspeed, and that will be base. And then if we call out an airspeed, it would be base plus 10, base plus 20, whatever we take, because lead would fly. So we said that, okay. do whatever it takes, maintain cell integrity. If someone calls to brake a different way off the target, we're going to do it. So the tactics were there. There were orders in place. There were threats of court-martials. It was our airplane. It was our crew. We were going to do what it took to do the mission right with the best odds of survival. And we didn't have to do those things. There's no doubt in my mind that any one of those 3 ships would have done that to maintain integrity, to fly the mission, to get the best job done. So that's been a source of some consternation for me for a while, because it was again kind of continuing these tactics that weren't working. And the crews had finally decided, we'll do what we can, but we'll also fly the way we've learned to fly our missions. Yeah. That's kind of it for the war. That was my big moment in that war. We used to do fun stuff too, though. I mean,
like what?
Well, let's see. Well, one time, the pilot lost all his attaboys because the runway at Guam dips. And so for a big airplane, you have a timing check that you have to make. So when you start down, you dip down and you make your timing check. That's great. And then you start back up, and it's like you're slowing down. So one time we started down the runway, and it's a Pacific island, and it squalls every night. And so we're rolling along, and as we're coming up the hill, here comes this rain squall, and the pilot left the windshield wipers off. So we're going like a bat out of hell up the hill into this rain squall, and can't see anything. You can just see runway lights off to the side, but all you can see is rain in the windshield, and the pilot goes, "Oh shit!" It's like radar nav and nav are going, "What? What?" And so we did that one, and then one mission, we'd been there so long, and I'd been starting upgrading. So one mission, the pilot and I swapped seats. So from engine start all the way to recovery, I sat in the pilot's seat, the aircraft commander, he sat in my seat, and we acted like we were on the checklist in our own positions and flew the whole mission like that, just for grin. The other one that was funny was we had flown a controllability check on a G model off of Guam, and there was something was wrong with the airplane, so we came back and said it's not flying right. And this time they had in Guam, it's supposed to tell you, they had a place where you could jettison your bombs, this little remote island, and you could just jettison all your bombs. So if you had to land, you didn't have to land with all that explosive stuff on. So we're going down and drop down to the minimum altitude to jettison the bombs, and jettison them all armed, because you don't want unexploded bombs laying around in there. And we jettison all the bombs. It explodes. Shockwave kicks us up off autopilot, and we go out. And then we turn around and we head back to Anderson, to Guam. And the radar navigator, the bombardier, he says, "Hey, pilot." "Yeah, radar." He says, "Was that little island supposed to be making 3 knots across the ocean?" And there was this like, huh? So, and then everybody broke up because we realized he was ribbing us. But just for a second there, was that island supposed to be doing 3 knots? I'm like, no. So it was not a Navy ship, I can tell you. It was indeed the island, and it wasn't making any knots. And we came back at the end of the war, and we all came back. We came back in one piece. And
that's good.
we were really happy and thought that our ability to fly the airplane had a large part of that.
Okay. So how did you return home?
Oh, hey, that was a good deal. That time we got to fly G model home because the war was winding down, and they were bringing the Gs back. So since we were a G model crew, we got to fly our own airplane all the way back, 17 and a half hours.
Wow.
With an extra pilot and an extra nav. So there was 8 of us on the airplane. One refueling right over California, and then we landed at Blytheville, Arkansas, which was the SAC base where the largest number of B-50 crews, 2 crews, had gotten shot down during Linebacker 2. In fact, I flew in October with a crew with Captain Randy Craddock because their co-pilot was medically grounded, was sick. So I flew DNIF cover as a substitute on their crew, duty not involving flying. So I flew DNIF cover with them, and the G model broke. We lost a generator, shut it down because those things spin and it's dangerous. It's a lot of power, electrical power in the generator. And then after we dropped the bombs, another generator started to fluctuate, and so Captain Craddock, Randy goes, is that fluctuating? I said, oh, yes, sir, it is. Yeah. He says, well, what should we do? I said, well, if we shut it down, we'll have to divert to Utapao, Thailand. He says, really? I said, yeah. I said, it's fluctuating. He says, shut it down. And we diverted to Utapao, and since it was a G model, we spent 2.5 days at Utapao because they had to fly parts in from Anderson and Guam. Mm-hmm. So we all got to go out and buy civilian clothes, and we spent some time downtown shopping and at the club and stuff. So we had a really nice time. And then we flew a combat mission out of there with 2 D models. I flew a risk combat mission, and then at the end of the mission, in the G, we broke off and went back to Guam on our own and landed. And so little did I know, that was October, December 20th, they got shot down. And the only one that survived was a gunner. Wow. So it's another little life lesson about life's short, you just don't know. Okay.
And how were you received by your family and community?
Well, the family was great. The wife, a couple of different times, met us. The wing commander would let them come out in a bus when we came in, and they'd come out and see us. Almost everybody there at the base in northern Maine had flown some of these missions, so it was a really tight sense of community. You'd been in combat together, and you knew, and even if you hadn't been with them, you knew what they went through. So it was really good. When we landed at Blytheville, I went to Memphis to catch a flight back because the family had dispensed. So you had to wear your military uniform to fly on a government ticket. So I put my blues on at Blytheville in the bathroom, and then a guy took me in a station wagon to Memphis, and it was nothing. There's nothing going on. One woman came up to me and says, "Are you a bus driver? When's the bus? Are you doing it?" And I was in my blues with my ribbons, and I don't know if she was stupid or if she was trying to annoy me. I really don't know. But it was interesting in that time when we got back, especially after Linebacker, to see that really nobody gave a shit. And other people were treated worse. I mean, I was never spit on or anything, but there was no parade, no welcome home, no good for you. There weren't even good for you. There wasn't even acknowledgement at the time that we'd really brought them back to the peace table. So it was not disappointing, but it was interesting to see. What didn't disappoint me at all, because I didn't expect a parade or a welcome home or anything, but you expected some acknowledgement of risking your life. But anyway, we went back about our business, started learning nuclear war again because the Soviet Union was still there.
Oh.
Yeah.
Are you a member of any veterans organization? If so, which one?
Well, there's a Utapao Alumni Association for people from all different career fields: maintenance, flyers, ground maintenance, field maintenance, munitions maintenance, all that. The Utapao Alumni Association, I belong to that. They have reunions regularly, pretty much every year. And you just get to hang out with people that went through that same thing that you did and appreciate what happened. And then about 1.5 or 2 years ago, I joined the River Rats, which is the Red River Valley Fighter Pilots Association, which started as a group of fighter pilots in Vietnam that had flown into Route Pack 6, where they'd done that and the buff drivers hadn't. But when the buffs went up there, they changed their rules. And for one thing, they didn't even have to change their rules, because each of those 3 missions we flew was in Route Pack 6, and it was in the Red River Valley. But they've changed the rules dramatically too, and adjusted to the changing times. And any military crew member is eligible for the air crew member is eligible for the Red River Rats. They have a Air Warrior Foundation that does charitable good works and everything. There's active duty members at Air Force bases all over the country, Vietnam veterans, Korea, and all. So it's a really active, great association. So I belong to the River Rats too. But that's all.
Okay. So, how did your wartime experience affected your life?
Well, that aha moment, that life is short, has affected my life in any number of situations, and it served me well. You know, if something's an emergency, then it is. If it's not, then you prioritize things. You deal with them as best you can with what you have, and you move on. So that was really an aha moment in every sense of the definition. Proud of what I've done. A little embarrassed now when people actually say thank you for your service. Like, well, you know, it was my honor, you know, but I mean, like, okay, but I appreciate that you're trying to do that, but not, you know, that's not why any of us did it. Yeah. So, but yeah.
Okay, I have a couple more questions.
Okay.
How has your military service impacted your feelings about war and the military in general?
That's a good one. Oh gosh, I need to look at this, because there was a quote there that I had. There's a quote going around, and it's got different attributes, but it's all that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And I think that's true. We did what we thought was right, and what our country had decided was right in our stead. People that have deployed and fought wars since then have done that too. I think you can look at Nazi Germany and say that that's an accurate statement. If good men do nothing, evil triumphs. People turn their heads. So I don't like war. It's ugly, it's nasty, it's horrible, but there are certain times when you have to, as a good man or a good person, stand up and confront evil. And if it takes war to do that, so be it.
That's good.
Yeah.
What message would you like to leave for future generations who will view this interview?
Oh gosh. There are some principles and some things that are worth fighting and even laying down your life for. You can go back to the Revolutionary War and a lot of wars since then, and just you need to be steadfast in your convictions. That's it.
Is there anything else you feel that we haven't discussed or should be added to this interview?
No.
Okay.
No,
that concludes our interview. Thank you for everything, by the way.
Okay.
Thank you.